Chapter 10. How to Pray for Others. You may wonder, when we talk about eliminating so much of the ritual of prayer, what about the beautiful prayers of tradition? What about the 23rd Psalm, the 91st Psalm, the Lord's Prayer? Such works, beautiful as they are, have no special credit with God. They are poems, quiet reveries, spiritual musings that may lift your spirits, but they are important only to the degree that they do uplift us. If they become a ritual and we say them perfunctorily, then they lose any spiritual power whatever. Now, even as background music may help to set the vibration in which you do good work, so reading some of these musings may set a good tone in consciousness for a prayer experience. For instance, you may voice the Lord's Prayer as part of your prayer time, but when you speak the words, it is important to know what they mean and mean what they imply when you say them. No words of prayer, not even the lovely Jewish Shema, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord God is one," have any special reception in the heart of God. Yet, if you can get the realization of oneness that the words imply, you may become synchronized with the flow of divine power. The psalmist heard the universe calling, and he listened, and the words of the 23rd Psalm flowed forth through him. You may hear the universe calling as you read the words of the psalm, and in the same way, you will open the intuitive flow in you, unfolding as your own song of life. Now, you may be thinking, okay, this emphasis on oneness in prayer is good. I am not to pray to God for help, but to know my oneness and to pray from that consciousness. But how do I pray for others? Can I change their life by changing my thoughts? Perhaps you should ask yourself, why do I want to change another person? It is a great waste of human energy. This frustrated desire or effort to change other people, to help a loved one to overcome a weakness, or heal an illness, or resolve conflicts, to make antagonists cease antagonizing. Changing other people may well be meddling in their affairs. I said it is a waste of energy to try to change another person, not because people can't change, but because change is a growth process from within the person's own self. More often than not, the desire to change other people is the desire to make them into something they are not. But the plain truth is, they can never be other than what they are. Of course, what they are is good enough if they can just stop frustrating their potential. They need only to be themselves, just more so than ever before. You may say, but shouldn't we try to help people who are hurting? Isn't it natural for a good person to be concerned? Of course it is natural. It is also natural for your finger to burn when it touches a hot stove. But you would respond reflexively and pull your finger away before there was a burn. When you are concerned about one who is ill or who is facing a crisis, you may suffer with that person vicariously. You hurt too. You may say, "My heart bleeds for you." Thus, you may tend to respond sympathetically to the person in crisis or in pain. It is very human to have a concern, but it is not wise to act impulsively on the concern in human consciousness. As long as an impulsive concern leads the way in prayer, you will fail to achieve positive results. The important need is not to try to effect some change in other people, but to make some changes in your thoughts about them. Don't try to set them right, but rather to see them rightly. And to see them rightly, you must get rid of some narrow frames of reference and get out of the feeling of concern. This is not to say it's easy, but to establish that it is possible. There is a divine mind milieu in which you live and move and have your being, and the same is true for the one about whom you are concerned. This is why thoughts of love or protection tend to evoke a subtle response in the other person. When you love another person, something in that person feels it and responds to it in some way. And when you think about that person you love, there is a response in that person to your thought. Research has revealed that plants in a room show a measurable response on an EKG to strong thoughts and emotions about them. Praise and love them, and they tend to flourish. Curse and criticize them, and they may be stunted. If it is true of plants, it seems more than likely that it is also true of people. Thus, when you worry about a loved one, the child on the way home from school, the wayward youth who has run off to some commune, the husband with the alcohol problem, the friend in the hospital, you are putting the full weight of your consciousness on the side of their difficulty. You are hindering their progress. You actually become a part of their problem. When you want to help someone about whom you are concerned, the important work is to be done in you. As far as you are concerned, the problems out there, no matter what or whom they involve, exist in your mind, your prejudices, your fears, and your anxious concerns. So your work, initially, is to change your thoughts, to heal and resolve your concern. This is why it is so very difficult to pray for one you love, your child, your spouse, a very close friend. You may defend your anxious concerns by saying, "But you don't understand, it's my baby." But I do understand. I have been there. You must make a choice. Do you want to help your baby or another person, or do you insist on standing in their way? You must heal your concern. You must let go and release your loved one into God's care and keeping. The work to be done is in you, on your consciousness, not in the other person. You must change your thoughts. You may object, but it is her thought that is negative. But it is your thought that is disturbed about it, and that personal disturbance is negative. There is no way that you can reach into another person's mind and erase all negative thoughts, despite your great love for them. You can only radiate what I call the contagion of a triumphant spirit that comes when you clear your own mind and get yourself centered and in tune. If you don't alter your thoughts, but remain upset and concerned about this other person, then you will be part of their problem. A man was distraught over his young son who was into drugs and alcohol. He was angry and insulted by the suggestion of a counselor that he was part of his son's problem, but eager to find the truth, in time he did, in fact, accept some responsibility for what was happening in his son, realizing that as long as his thoughts about the son were focused on worry and parental concern, he was giving support to the weakness. He had to learn to let go and let God, and it wasn't easy. In such cases, we hold on desperately. We don't want to let go. But if we really want to help, there is no other way. The father worked diligently to alter his anxious concern, and then he prayed, not to God about his son, but from the consciousness of God, projecting this consciousness to the son, saluting the divinity in him, seeing him strong and whole. Of course, he realizes that this alone will not do the work for the son. The answer can only come from within the young man himself. But the father made a great effort to overcome his own attitudes and responses. There is no way to know how or even why such results occur, but it is more than coincidence that the young man is well on the way to recovery. When I say I have been there, I really mean it. When my oldest son was about 5 years old, he rode his tricycle down a long flight of stone steps, sustaining a huge swelling on his forehead, where his head struck the concrete sidewalk. I rushed him to the emergency room of a nearby hospital. Of course, my boy was screaming in pain. The doctor was having a difficult time holding him still in order to treat him, and need I add, I was hurting with him. I suddenly became aware of the fact that I was adding to the problem in my understandably sympathetic parental reaction. So I walked out of the room, down the hall, out of the hospital, and down the driveway to the road. Here I sat on the curb with my head in my hands, wisely taking charge of myself. I knew I had to let go and block the experience out of my mind. It was not easy, for thoughts of, "But this is my son," kept clamoring for my attention. In time, I succeeded in getting quiet, and eventually felt a beautiful sense of peace, life, and wholeness. Presently, I realized with the start where I was and what I was facing. I thought of the young boy in the receiving room, but now without anxiety. As I returned to the hospital and on into the emergency room, I felt good about it. I knew all was well. I found the boy sitting up in a chair, smiling. The doctor had drained the swelling and put a bandage on the bruise. He said, "A few minutes after you left the room, the boy became quiet and relaxed. It was amazing." It was startlingly evident that I had been part of the problem. But you see, I wasn't praying for the boy out there on the curb. I was letting go, knowing peace. And because of the strong love bond between us, he was effectively blessed by my peaceful thoughts. When Jesus stood before the tomb of his friend Lazarus, he didn't cry out, "Dear Lord, this is my friend, please help him." If that had been the state of his consciousness, there would have been no dramatic resurrection. The account says, he lifted up his eyes and gave thanks. He was not looking off into the skies for help from above. He turned his thoughts away from the grim appearance that surely would have spelled grief and hopelessness, and turned to the truth that the universe was calling. And by giving thanks, he gave way to the mystic life flow. From his mind was erased the fact of a body 3 days in the tomb, and also his personal feelings of loss. His mind was open and receptive to the universe calling. I am the resurrection and the life. And as he continued to listen, the words came forth from his lips. Lazarus, come forth. And Lazarus walked out of the tomb. How can we understand such an impossible occurrence? I say, don't get caught up in specifics and thus miss the demonstration of the spiritual process. So that we might understand this process in a more general way, let's think about it in the case of your child running to you with a headache or a bruised knee. Because you love the child, you are, of course, anxiously concerned. But if you really want to help the child, you will quickly lift up your eyes and give thanks, which means you turn from the appearance and from your unnerving sympathetic response. You will free the child into its inner healing life and quietly know that the universe is calling, and listening, let the universe put words into your mouth. I am perfect healing life. Then you may speak soothingly and encouragingly to your child. You are all right. God is your help in every need. By this time, the child has stopped crying and says, "You always fix it." Yes, Mommy always fixes it. Daddy always makes it better. If Mommy and Daddy can first of all heal their anxious concerns, listen to the universe calling, and in consciousness become instruments of cosmic healing power. The reason it is so difficult to pray for the ones you love when they are hurting physically or emotionally is precisely that you love them. You are sympathetically attuned to them. Even as you feel joy with their laughter, you hurt with their pain and discouragement. A father holding his birthing wife's hand may actually have sympathetic labor pains. Or spouses may feel sad watching each other stoically cover up their obvious disappointment over a setback in business or a crisis in their careers. To really help the other person in this situation is not easy, even for a good student of truth. But always remember that the first and sometimes only need is to heal your concern. That means changing your thoughts about the person. Try to go apart in some way and get yourself centered. And when you feel at peace about it, you are ready to pray. But be careful to avoid the trap of praying to God for help. Rather, pray from the consciousness of God. You may be sitting by a friend or loved one in the hospital when the doctor gives a grave prognosis. You may find yourself emotionally swept up in the situation. Instead of sitting there commiserating with a long face, trying hard to look pleasant but feeling terribly sad and worried, it is much better to assure the patient of your love and support, and then leave the room. You will be far more effective having your prayer time in the visitor's waiting room or out in your car or when you return home. Don't pray for the patient in pain who is back there in the hospital. Rather, get the feeling that the universe is calling, and as you listen, you are lifted up to a high awareness of life and wholeness. As you lift yourself, so are you influential in lifting the patient also. For love knows no separation. As Jesus said, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me. John 12, verse 32. There is no way to explain logically how it works, but it does work. And you haven't even specifically prayed for the person in words. Of course, if you want to, and you probably will want to because it may give you a greater assurance that you are doing something, you may whisper an affirmation of truth or a spiritual treatment for the person. But remember, you are not doing it to make it true or to make something happen, but only to identify with wholeness and to see the loved one in this awareness. The key is letting go. Unless you can let go, you can't pray effectively for another person. An insistent concern for the other person indicates an unwillingness to let go. You may say, but you don't understand. It is my mother who is ill, and I am concerned about her. You see, I love her very much. Of course, but if you really love her, you will let go and free her to her own wholeness. Unless you can let go of your concern and get yourself centered, you will not only be unable to help her, you may actually be hindering her progress despite your frantic prayers. Here is a metaphor that has been personally helpful for me. Visualize being in a rowboat by a dock on which the person you want to pray for is standing. Imagine that your prayer is an experience of rowing away from the dock. You may recall that you row a boat facing backwards as you row forwards. Thus, as you row, you face that from which you are rowing. If you are praying effectively, you are moving progressively away from the dock, from the person you are concerned about. As you row, the person keeps getting smaller until finally they disappear. You have succeeded in getting the person out of the forefront of your consciousness. You have really let go. Oh, the person is still back there on the dock or in the hospital, but you don't have your clutches on them. You free them to their own unfoldment, and because you love them, you may be a positive influence in their healing. How often should you pray for the other person? As often as you find your anxious thoughts creeping back. It is a matter of change your thoughts and keep them changed. If you find yourself taking responsibility and feeling guilty, feeling that you should be praying more often, then you are praying amiss. Someone once asked me, how can you possibly hold all the people in prayer whom you are praying for? This supposes that one in my position spends hours at a time holding prayer thoughts about all the persons and situations who have requested such help. I might ask, do you want me to worry about you all the time, or do you want me to pray for you? If I pray for you, I will roll away until I can let you go in faith and free you to your complete healing. Then I may speak a word of truth for you and go on to other things. I am still holding you in spiritual awareness, but without conscious concern. And if I have a recurring feeling of concern, I go through the letting go process again. One person said to me, I spend all my time praying for my loved ones, and I love it, but it's exhausting. But the truth is, if you are exhausted by prayer, the ego is involved, and you are praying in human consciousness. There is no way that you can be drained by any spiritual effort if you know that it is not I, but the Father. Actually, if you are praying aright, in the process of letting the healing power flow through you, you are infilling yourself. If you are working in prayer for a dozen people in a day, you should be that many times stronger at the close of the day. True prayer is not exhausting, ever. Many healers would do well to confront themselves with this test of their spiritual integrity. You may be unaware that you are working in an egocentric way. Some people give themselves away unwittingly. They may say, "This is what I am doing for these people." And some may say, "I healed that person." Such an attitude is dangerous to the praying person, for they are working at the expense of their inner power rather than at its expanse. One thing to keep in mind when you are praying for a loved one, spouse, child, or a close friend, is keep the high watch. Keep your loved ones in the awareness of wholeness. Someone may ask, "How is your husband?" Don't fall into the negative state. "Oh, he is having a terrible time. I am praying, but I don't know. It's not easy." Instead, you can say, "He is going through an experience, but he is doing well. Join us in knowing the truth for him." That's it. Above all, don't get into an organ recital, sharing information about the condition and the doctor's prognosis. If you discuss the problem in a negative way, then your prayers are counteracted, and you are part of the patient's problem. What if the one you are praying for is in a distant place? What about absent treatment? Remember, the whole of God is present at every point in time and space, so give no thought to distance. I don't like the term absent treatment, for it implies that you are doing something special, a kind of spiritual voodoo. In truth, the presence is present here and everywhere. So don't get into the thought of distance. Actually, being removed from close proximity with one who is hurting may be an advantage, for you may not be so tempted to react emotionally to the appearances. If the consciousness is high enough, you should be able to pray for one on the other side of the world as effectively as one on the other side of the room, perhaps even more effectively. Always remember, the first step in praying for one you want to help is to heal your concern. Let go and let God be God in you and in that other person too.